Welcome to Counterpunch with Trevor Loudon. Today I thought we'd do a deep drill down on Joe Biden. This is the man who may be President of the United States, the most powerful politician in the Western world, or he may end up somewhere else not quite so salubrious. So Joe Biden, it amazes me how the mainstream media has got away with painting this man as some kind of moderate, some kind of old-fashioned, blue-collar, centrist Democrat. His whole record is completely at variance with that. Back in the 1980s, there were 3 senators in the US Senate who really opposed Reagan. When Reagan was trying to confront the Soviet Union, when Reagan was trying to oppose communism in Latin America, 3 senators were his main opponents. There was Ted Kennedy, that was John Kerry, and it was Joe Biden. And now you see that Joe Biden is trying to bring John Kerry back, put him in charge of climate change policy. You know, John Kerry was a hardcore leftist. He betrayed this country during the Vietnam War. I often describe him as Jane Fonda with less testosterone. Yet Joe Biden wants to bring him back from the dead. All through that Reagan era, the late 70s, etc., Joe Biden, John Kerry, and Ted Kennedy were the left's big champions in the Senate. But if you go back further, how did Joe Biden even get elected? Well, in 1972, he was a 29-year-old city councillor in Wilmington, Delaware, who decided to confront and run against a 4-term Republican incumbent with an 80% approval rating. So you'd think that'd be a bit of a suicide mission, right? But Joe Biden won, and he won because he had the help of a little known but very significant organization called the Council for a Livable World. It's still around. You can check out their website. They've elected more than 200 senators so far, and virtually nobody in America knows them and no media covers them. So what was the Council for a Livable World? Well, it was started in 1962 by a Hungarian national US citizen called Leo Szilard, S-Z-I-L-A-R-D. Now, Szilard was a Manhattan Project scientist. He was one of the top scientists who helped to develop the US nuclear bomb that you used to win the war against Japan. And he was regarded as a major security risk. Leslie Groves, who was in charge of security for the project, always wanted to fire Szilard because he knew he had a Hungarian communist background, but the guy was just too valuable. So after the war, Szilard turned from inventing atomic weapons to campaigning against use. He became a big anti-nuclear campaigner. And in 1962, he sets up the Council for a Livable World. And the purpose of this group, it was a political action committee, it was a PAC. The purpose of this group was to identify young left-wing candidates in very small states who could then be elected to the US Senate on a comparatively low budget. A lot easier to elect a senator from New Hampshire or Maine or Vermont or Delaware than it is from Texas or California. So they set about identifying these people, and they would gather money for them, they would gather support, endorsements from the Democratic Party, etc. And one of their very first successes was Joe Biden. But the quid pro quo was this: we will elect you, we will support you, we will guide you, we will get you money and endorsements. Your job is to gut the US military. Your job is to cancel weapon systems, to work for US nuclear disarmament, to negotiate unfavorable treaties between America and the Soviet Union, for instance. And Joe Biden, as I've said, was one of their very first successes. It was revealed in 1994 by a man called Pavel Sudoplatov, a former top-ranking Soviet intelligence officer that Leo Szilard was a fully recruited Soviet agent. And that even more troubling, he was commanded by Beria, who was Stalin's spy chief, to abandon spying after World War II, to stop spying for the Soviet Union because it was too dangerous. The FBI was on his trail. Instead, use your political capital to work for US nuclear disarmament. See, by that time, thanks to Szilard and others, the Soviet Union had an atomic weapon. So you had an atomic arms race between the Soviet Union and the United States. And the way to win that race in Soviet theory was to use the American political process to work for US nuclear disarmament, which would then give the Soviet Union an advantage that would lead to the nuclear blackmail of the United States and eventual American surrender and consequently Soviet world dominance. That was the theory. So Szilard forms the Council for a Livable World. He sets about electing left-wing senators, and in 1972 along comes this opportunity of a young man called Joe Biden. Well, a man who actually recruited Biden, who actually interviewed Biden and then set about getting the money for Biden, and it was many thousands of dollars, plus I think Biden's budget was about $287,000 for that election cycle, and the Council for a Livable World supplied at least a third of that, which was a lot of money for 1972 Delaware. The people and the council got the endorsements, the council got a lot of Democratic Party support, a lot of volunteers from out of state, and Joe Biden won. But the man who actually organized all of this was the president of the Council for a Livable World at the time. His name was Albert Gore Sr. Some of you may have heard of his son. He invented the internet and global warming. That's Al Gore, Senator Al Gore, who stood for US President in 2000. Well, Albert Gore Sr. was also a US Senator from Tennessee, but he was a long-time business associate and protege of a man called Armand Hammer. Now, some of you may have heard of Armand Hammer. He was a very famous US business and political figure. He was the head of Occidental Petroleum. But during the 1920s, he did a lot of business deals with the Soviet Revolution, with the Soviet Union. He went to Moscow, spent several years there, worked in the fur trade, worked in the chemical trade, exported fine arts from the Soviet Union, sold them in America, etc., and made a lot of money keeping the Bolshevik Revolution alive. He was identified by J. Edgar Hoover and others as a bona fide Soviet agent, carried on that work for many, many years. And though he nominally became a Republican in later years, he still continued his work for the Soviet Union. He never abandoned the left. You know, his father had been a founder of the Communist Party USA, so that left-wing thinking was always strong in Armand Hammer. So Armand Hammer picks up, he needed support in the US Senate because the FBI was always on his case, and he picked Albert Gore Sr. He involved in some livestock deals and other businesses that made Albert Gore Sr. lots and lots of money. So Al Gore Sr. interviews the young Joe Biden, regards him as a very promising young progressive figure, and then he provides the money, provides the wherewithal to get Joe Biden elected to the US Senate.
You know, my ties with the council run long and deep, stretching way back to my first campaign for the United States Senate. I'll never forget the faith you showed and the help you gave to a young man making a long-shot bid for the United States Senate in 1972. Because of you, we won.
So Joe Biden gets into the Senate. He becomes chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, a very, very powerful institution. And during that time, He was well on the left. He regularly visited the Soviet Union. He actively opposed Reagan at virtually every turn. And though he was regarded as a little bit moderate or even slightly conservative on some, domestic issues, because he had to please his own constituency. Delaware at the time was not really a Democrat state. He was the first Democrat to get elected for many, many years. So he had to be relatively conservative on domestic issues, but on foreign policy, defense, armaments, America's nuclear arsenal, weapons programs, etc., he was an ultra dove. He was always looking for ways to gut the US military. And that was completely in accordance with his brief from the Council for a Livable World. This continued right through the years. You can see he's still involved with the Council for a Livable World right up until his place in the Obama administration when he became vice president. And you'll see the tape we're going to play of him at the 50th, sending a message to the 50th anniversary of the Council for a Livable World in 2012. He clearly talks about his long-time connections to the Council. He talks about the guidance that the Council gave him over many years as chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and his gratitude for helping him and Obama. And by the way, Obama was also another Council for a Livable World recruit. He talks about his gratitude for the guidance that he was given during the negotiation of the START treaty with Russia, the treaty that was so bad for America, so disastrous for this country, and so good for Moscow that President Trump had to unilaterally cancel it. US defense policies for decades. The Council also claims to have influenced several major arms limitation treaties signed with the Soviet Union or Russia, all of which benefited Moscow and damaged the United States. But is this just boasting? How successful has the Council for a Livable World actually been?
From ratifying the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty and START to establishing a nuclear testing moratorium here at home, to the Chemical Weapons Convention, and to this very day, your support and guidance during our recent effort to ratify New START.
So if you look at Joe Biden's history with the Soviet Union and Russia, he was clearly working for an organization whose interests coincided very heavily with those of Moscow. And he has worked in that direction for all of his political career. Now, if you think about the implications of that in the world as it stands today, right now, Russia, thanks to Joe Biden and others, is way, way ahead of America in numbers of nuclear weapons. And those nuclear weapons are brand new, state-of-the-art, and super dangerous. Meanwhile, the United States has not built a new nuclear weapon since 1992. And their shelf life is theoretically 25 years. So there are serious considerations. There are people who are seriously thinking that America no longer has a real nuclear deterrent at all. And if you look at the fact that Russia is continuing its weapons build-up at breakneck speed and is allied with China in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and China has now one of the most powerful militaries in the world, you can see that the work of Joe Biden has put America at a huge disadvantage. There's a lot of people in this country that think, well, look, we could get in a war with China, but we will beat China. But and they look at China as the #1 enemy, and the Communist Party of China is an incredibly dangerous enemy. But people need to confront the horrible reality that the Communist Party of China is allied to Russia, is allied to Moscow. They're joined together in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is a military, economic, and political alliance. It's a pact. It incorporates Iran, it incorporates Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, most of the former Soviet republics, and it is one of the most powerful military alliances the world has ever seen. You know, back in 2018, Russia and China held the world's biggest ever military exercise just outside St. Petersburg in Russia. Now clearly they are getting ready for something. Clearly they're getting ready to change the balance of power in the world. And if you look at who has helped them to achieve that, you need to look no further than Joe Biden. So what happens if Joe Biden becomes president? Is he going to stand up to Russia, whose interests he's worked for since 1972? Is he going to stand up to China, when his son Hunter Biden has done massive business deals with China, which according to evidence that's coming out now, that Joe Biden was fully aware of and was a beneficiary of? So we're in a situation where the United States, the leader of the free world, may have a president who's worked most of his life for America's major enemy, Moscow, and its new up-and-coming enemy, Beijing. He's worked in the interests of those two countries, both of which are building up militarily, both of which are aggressively pumping propaganda and disinformation into this country, both of which have been called out for interfering in the recent presidential election, and in the least in the case of China, in Biden's favor. So can we think of a more scary scenario than what we presented with? You know, President Trump right now is still working on an effort to overturn the results of the fraudulent 2020 election. The election that China interfered in all number of ways. Is it an exaggeration to say that the future of the Western world, the future of the free world, depends on the outcome of this election? Because if you think about this, right now China is being very, very aggressive in Asia. It is working in South Korea to basically turn that country into a puppet of North Korea and China. Japan is very, very worried about Chinese intentions. Taiwan is under constant threat. The Philippines are also very concerned, as are countries like Indonesia, Malaysia, obviously India, which has had recent military confrontations with China, as are Australia and New Zealand. So right now all these countries are thinking, well, we need to confront the Communist Party of China. If we don't confront them, they're going to dominate our region. They may subjugate us. Right now we have a friend in the White House, President Trump, who's very actively opposed to the Communist Party of China and has done much to keep them contained. What if we now get a president, Joe Biden, who has worked in the interest of China for a long time, has business deals with China, and also has a history with China's ally, Russia? What must the leaders of all these nations be thinking right now? Surely they'd be a little concerned. And that's why I say the balance of world power depends on this election. And the same situation occurs in Europe. Right now Russia is threatening the Ukraine. The Baltic states are extremely concerned about Russian expansionism, as are the Scandinavian countries. You know, Sweden is trying to beef up its military. Other countries are trying to as well. But they know they will have very little chance of doing anything to fend off Russia without American backing. Now, President Trump has done a lot of good with the Ukrainians standing up to Russia. He has backed the Ukraine better than any other US president. And we need to understand that America signed an obligation to the Ukraine to support them against Russian aggression back at the dissolution of the Soviet Union. Ukraine gave up its nuclear arsenal in exchange for American protection. That was the deal. And Trump has fulfilled his part of that deal. But what will Biden do? Can anybody trust Biden to keep that deal going? Can anybody trust Biden not to give in to Russia, in whose interest he has worked for a very long time? So this is where we are, America. We're at the crossroads. President Trump is re-elected. He will continue to build his alliance against China. I believe he will be able to do to the Chinese Communist Party what President Reagan did to the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. Then you will have a free China. All that energy and enterprise and culture will be harnessed towards good rather than towards evil, and we will have a very different world. Russia will be contained, Europe will stay free, and then we will see probably freedom revolutions through Latin America, Africa, and other countries. If Biden is elected, all of that goes away. You will see, I believe, the advance of the Communist Party of China, the advance of Russia, the eventual subjugation of Europe, the continued subjugation of Africa and much of Asia, Chinese dominance of the South Pacific, the Pacific in total. You'll see the collapse of Indian opposition to China. You will see Japan forced to do a deal with China. South Korea will be brought under communist control, and America will be surrounded by hostile enemies. And then it's only a matter of time before America itself is lost. So this is what I'm looking at here, folks. I seriously think this election will completely alter the balance of power in the world. This is a competing vision between President Trump and Joe Biden. Joe Biden, a man who has worked in the interest of America's enemies for almost all of his political career. You know, we need some courage, folks. We need some courage in the state legislatures. We need courage in the courts to make sure this election is given to the man who rightfully won it. Because it's not just America at stake, it's the entire world. So we're developing these themes further in further episodes of Counterpunch with Trevor Loudon. So thanks for tuning in. We'll see you again soon.